Power and Politics, we have seen a huge public pushback on the government's online surveillance bill. There's no sign that this backlash is receding, so the government says it will now consider amendments to this legislation. Will changes be enough? What can Canada learn from other countries that have adopted similar laws, such as, for example, the UK? Joining me now is Gus Hossain, Senior Fellow of Privacy International, that's based out of London, England. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
You've been watching very closely this very controversial legislation about lawful access, the surveillance bill. The government initially sold this as saying this is other countries, including England, have this. What was your impression when you saw this bill and how it may relate to other bills?
I saw this country was about to repeat all of the errors that have been conducted already in the United Kingdom. 10 years ago, this legislation was introduced with the same belligerence about you either with the terrorists or you're with us. And lo and behold, they get the power where senior law enforcement officials can self-authorize, get access to extensive amounts of information about who you've been calling, where you were, which websites you've been visiting, and of course your own personal information, such as your name. And this has been abused considerably in the United Kingdom. Every year, there's around 1 million requests for this type of information by the police. And it's not just police. It's also municipal governments have been requesting this information to conduct very basic fraud investigations. And finally, they're now investigating whether or not the news hacking scandals in the United Kingdom involved the media actually paying the police to get access to this type of information.
All right, let's roll back a bit. When the government talked about this, they said, look, we just want some basic information according to them. Name, address, ISP, right, or IP address, right? They said it's not like reading emails. Don't worry, it's not surveillance. It's much like information people have in the phone book. That was how they characterized it. How do you see that?
I see this information as being worse than the content of your communications. It's the information about you and about the communications you undertake. This is what discloses the innards of your private life. So what I choose to say over the telephone is one thing, but what I disclose to my telephone company or my ISP, that is information that divulges far more about me than what I choose to say to
In other words, which websites you went to,
Exactly.
not necessarily your email.
Exactly.
How has it, you say it's been requested over 1 million times, how has it been abused to invade privacy, if indeed that has been the case?
So when governments introduce these types of laws, they tend to say it's in order to combat terrorism, it's in order to combat child pornography. But in the day-to-day policing, it is used for every purpose under the sun. And that's why you need strong safeguards to make sure it's only used under very specific investigations and authorized in very specific ways.
So give me some examples here, because they say there's lots of oversight. They've said there'll be oversight in this bill. Only in exceptional circumstances will there be a warrantless arrest, and even without a warrant being able to investigate. And then even then there'll be some post facto oversight. Where do you see the line ought to be?
When you're dealing with requests of the order of 500,000 to 1 million, how do you actually do oversight over every single request? You don't. So in the United Kingdom, what they do is they choose a few, like a dozen. They look through a dozen every year and say, okay, that looked pretty reasonable to me. And any policeman, any official can make any request look reasonable. That's the problem. So we've found cases where municipal governments are using this power to follow families around. You claim you live in one neighborhood, we think you live in another, so we're going to track your telephone information and your internet information. It's this kind of abuse that's taking place.
So how do you parse it? Is it just a blunt instrument? So let's say they say the police in certain circumstances do want to follow child pornographers or child predators. How do you tranche that off and then not have all these other possible ways to surveil the rest of the public and use it potentially for abusive purposes?
Independent authorization. It comes down to having a judge issue a warrant. You can't have the police self-authorize because that's where the abuse takes place. When they have to justify to an independent third party that this is the case that we're investigating, it's a serious case, we need this information, the judges are going to say yes, this is how law is done.
Get a warrant. Is there such thing, for example, as we're going to be, the government says it will implement some kind of amendments to the bill. What about things like a fast warrant? In an emergency case, if there is one. The government says, look, a warrant can take a lot of time. It takes a lot of trouble to make a warrant. Is there such thing as a fast warrant in exceptional cases for certain issues?
Absolutely, and that's a great idea, too, because there are a lot of investigations that are fast-moving, and they need to respond almost instantaneously. So every law in every country that has this type of regime always includes a fast warrant that they then have to justify after the fact. That's absolutely fine.
When you saw this bill, is this a bill that can be amended, or when you read it, with your point of view and your experience in England, is this the kind of bill that's got to be trashed or fixed?
I think it could be fixed. I think it could be fixed and turned into the model for the rest of the world.
In what way?
That it would be the example of how to do this right, so you don't end up in the United Kingdom with the abuse that's taking place there.
So give me the fixes. What are the 3 or 4 things that...
Independent authorization.
Right.
So you get the warrants. Limited use. It's not just for any old investigation. It's for very specific investigations. They say it's about child pornography. Make it about child pornography. Make it about terrorism investigations, serious crime investigations. Those are the 2 key requirements.
So much more narrowly defined, still have independent authorization, and never getting, never having a warrantless moment.
Absolutely.
Those are the key things. I appreciate your time tonight. We've been talking about this for a number of weeks.
Yes,
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.